Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Eric and I like to read, and today we're going to be doing my October wrap up. So, in the month of October, I ended up reading a total of 7 books. A lot of them were not thrillers. I wanted to read thrillers and I wanted to have a very thrilling month, but unfortunately, a lot of the books didn't really scare me that much, and that's kind of a bummer. So, I'm still on the lookout for some good thrillers because I really just want to be creeped out. It's just what I'm looking for. I'm also very excited for the Reindeer Readathon, which is coming up soon. My next video actually will be an announcement for it, so stay tuned for that. But anyways, let's get into the books that I read in October. So the first book I read was Mexican Gothic, and I will show it here because I read this book via audiobook. I listened to it while we were traveling home for Thanksgiving weekend and when we were traveling back. So it was the perfect time to listen to a book. And I actually did this as a group book for the Halloween bookish ball that we had. And we did a live discussion on the book there. So I won't go too much into depth on it. But essentially, I gave this book a low 3 rating because the book I don't think translates very well to audio. I In my personal opinion, I think that the book could have used more people on the cast for the audiobook. I think that would have given it a little bit more oomph and made it a better book. Just because the narrator of the audiobook, every time they did a man's voice, they did the same kind of sounding man's voice, and there are multiple men cast in this book as characters, and a lot of the time I had a hard time differentiating which man was speaking because they all sounded similar to me. So I don't know, this is also only the second or third audiobook that I've ever listened to, so that could also be it. But I just think that this book would have benefited from more people as voice casting in this book. The one thing I did note about the book is that it's a very atmospheric book, and the author goes into lots of description with her adjectives, which at times I found kind of funny because she was using very interesting adjectives for describing outdoor nature scenes, and I thought that was interesting at least. The main character was okay. I did find that the book took a long time to actually pick up the pace, and then when it did pick up the pace, the ending wasn't quite satisfying enough for me to rate it higher. I just think that it could have went in so many other directions where it would have been a lot scarier or creepier than it was. That being said, it still was an interesting twist. I'm not going to tell you anything about that, but it wasn't exactly where I expected it to go, and it was interesting, but it still wasn't scary. I guess I had built this book up to think that it was going to be a very scary book. I mean, it's called Mexican Gothic, and the front cover is a girl holding flowers, and I don't know, it just looks, the whole front cover of the book is a very creepy vibe, but it just didn't live up to the expectations I had given it in my head. So yeah, unfortunately, it's just a low 3 for this one. Then I did a buddy read of Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I did this buddy read with Amanda, and her channel is Her Pacific Northwest Washington Life. So we buddy read this, I think at the very beginning of October, and it was decent. I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5. It was okay. I just found that you already kind of knew what was going to happen at the end, because the beginning of the book tells you that a child is murdered, and the whole book is kind of giving you the missing pieces as to how that child was murdered. So the ending it wasn't exactly as satisfying as I was thinking it would be. There were definitely some chilling moments in this book that I would not want to be in those situations. So I did like that. That added to this book and bumped up the rating for me. I will say that some things were a little unrealistic. But they kind of tied together at the end to make sense why they were unrealistic. And I would be interested to read more by this author just to see what else she can do with the book. Just because basing it on this book alone, I was left with wanting to read a little bit more on a different take or a different story by her. I liked the way she wrote it. I liked her writing style. Just this story itself wasn't phenomenal. It was a middle book for me. I didn't mind reading it. I'm glad I read it. But yeah, I can bring it back to the used bookstore and get a decent amount of credit for it because the sticker's still on. So I probably will do that just because I don't think I would read this again, considering it's also a thriller, and a thriller that I rated in the middle. Don't really need it on the shelves. But I'm glad I did do the buddy read and read it. Then I had A Tale of Six, which I'll show here because I also read this one on ebook. This was a book written by an author that I actually did an author interview for on this channel. So I will link that in the description down below so you can check that out. This book was kind of a collection of short stories, but it was told in a really interesting way. So the two main characters of this book, they meet at the beginning of the book, and then they go back to a house or a cabin. I think it's a cabin. They go back to a cabin and they're waiting out at the cabin for a certain reason, but they decide that while they're at the cabin, they're going to tell scary stories and see who can tell the scarier story. And so it's a tale of six. So there's six different stories that they share back and forth. And all of them I thought were pretty like creepy stories. And I thought it was really cool how they did this and how they had like one underlying story with the six stories included in it. I thought it was really fun. Some of these stories actually reminded me a lot of Black Mirror episodes, and I love the show Black Mirror. I think it's like, I don't know, it's a super chilling show. So that was like good and brought the rating up for me. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars because there were definitely parts where I was creeped out, and it was relatively fast paced enough that I like flew through the whole thing. I mean, it's also a novella, so it's not very long, but I did fly through it really quickly. I really enjoyed all the different pieces that were put together, and the underlying story was probably the most chilling out of all the stories included in it. And yeah, I would recommend just checking this book out because honestly, it's a quick read, it's fun, and you'll feel a little creeped out. This was like the one book that did give me the creeped out vibes this month. Then I read Blood Foam, and this was another thriller book. Thriller, I'll say that lightly. It was more of like a crime thriller. The main character is a reporter slash detective. They're kind of like a detective self-made, and they are trying to rebuild their house because it got destroyed. And then their ex comes to them asking for help in finding their current love because they have gone missing. And so this guy kind of teams up with her and goes into detective mode to figure out what's going on. This book I gave a 2 out of 5. It was kind of a letdown for me. It wasn't very thrilling. When it did get to action scenes, I just wasn't invested in it at all. Like, I felt like I could care less about any of the characters in this book. And I thought that even though it's a short book, it felt like a long book. There was just so much in here that was not needed. Like, I know when an author wants to do a lot of build up for a book, and there's reasons for that build up, but in this book, there was just, the build up had no purpose. And so I just didn't feel like it was necessary. I mean, to be fair, I did pick this book up for, I think, $3 on a discount rack at Chapters. So yeah, like I didn't spend that much money on it, and that's probably why. But yeah, it wasn't a great book. I gave it a 2 out of 5, and that's that. Then I read 7 Deadly Shadows, and this book was a 5 out of 5 stars. This was my shining star for the month of October. This is an arc that was sent to me by HarperCollins, and it actually came out in January of 2020. So yeah, it came out quite a while ago, and I was sleeping on this. I really should have picked this up earlier because this has been on my shelf since January of 2020. Actually, I think I had it before January. But anyways, I was sleeping on this book. This book was fantastic. It was such a fun, dark fantasy book. I just had such a blast with it. So this one deals a lot with like kitsunes and like Japanese fantasy mythology. Lots of different like spirit elements come into play in this book, and there were just there was so much really cool like Japanese folklore in here that I was just having an amazing time learning about all these things while following along with the main character and their mission that they were on, which is like to save their family from a demon king. How cool is that? And it was a retelling of Seven Samurai. So like the main character had to team up with 7 death gods. And that in itself is so cool. Like I could not stop gushing about this book. It was so much fun. And there's like little characters in there. There's one little character in there, my little Oni-chan. I friggin' love that character. And the whole time I'm like rooting for Oni-chan. I'm like, yep, yep. And anytime they like came into, I wanted to say screen. Anytime they came into a scene, I was just like, oh yes, I love them. They're so friggin' adorable. And just, yeah. The Oni-chan is like a little cat creature. So obviously like the whole time I'm thinking of like my Uno. And it was just so cute. I just love the little Oni-chan. I think it was like the perfect addition to this book, and it just added for an extra like cutesy adorable character. And it was perfect to have that character in this book since the entirety of this book is pretty intense. It starts off really quickly and just gets right into it, and it's action packed. There is little that you're sitting there thinking like, okay, why, like, is this part needed in the book? No, like the whole thing is a thrill ride. I just had so much fun with this book, and I would honestly recommend this to anybody. I think it's fantastic. So yeah, don't sleep on this. Go pick up Seven Deadly Shadows. You won't regret it. Then I read James Clyde and the Tomb of Salvation. This was a middle grade book. It was actually the second book in a series. So I never read the first book. I just jumped right into the second book, but apparently you don't need to read the first book. You can definitely pick this one up as a standalone and read it aside from reading the first book. And it was about like a group of kids that have powers, and then they're also kind of like fighting off against this other evil queen. I would call her a queen. And they're all trying to get to this place called the Tomb of Salvation, because if they can get there, they can get immortality. So it's kind of this group of kids banding together to get to this tomb before the queen and her minions to obviously get the immortality, or stop the queen from getting immortality because they don't want her to have that. It was a very like fast-paced middle grade read. There wasn't too much complexity to it because it was a middle grade, but I kind of enjoyed that because I don't read a lot of middle grade. So I just got to feel like that childlike innocence again when I picked up this book. And yeah, and it just felt very lighthearted and fun. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 because it was just a good middle grade read. It was a lot of fun to go through. I don't know if there's any more continuing after this, or it didn't really seem like it left space for another book. I think this is it. But yeah, I would say check this one out. And I'm sure the first one is actually pretty good too. I can't say because I haven't read it, but this was the second one and I enjoyed it. So yeah. And then the last book I read was Hinterland. This is about a family. They live in Ireland, and the mother of the family is dealing with mental illness, and the father is trying to take care of their daughter while also taking care of his wife, who is mentally ill and living at home. She needs to take pills every day to like keep this in control, and needless to say, things get out of control. Other relationships from the past are brought into play, and things get a little complicated. It's like you see the entirety of the daughter and the father. Like, it switches perspectives every once in a while, and it spans over her being 6 to 14, I believe. And some traumatic events happen during this time that they all have to deal with. And so it's a lot of just like real hard-hitting stuff. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 just because I feel like there were some parts in it that did not need to be there. Like, I think it was a little bit too long. And the other books I've read by this author were all short stories or collections of short stories, so anthologies, which I really loved all those books. They were great. I still thought this book was all right. I just think that there was too much to it. Like, I think it could have been a little bit shorter, and the points that, like, the hard-hitting stuff would still hit just as hard without all that, like, too much build up for it. But overall, it was an interesting book, and I always like reading this author's books because they're all set in Ireland, and I've been to Ireland, so it's really cool because like I can visually like picture the places that these people are and like feel like I'm there. So that part is really fun with this author's books. And those are all the books I read in the month of October. Not too many thrilling books. I wish I would have read a little bit more thrilling of books. I'll just keep having to add some thrillers to my existing TBRs each month. And then that way I can get some spookiness or creepy vibes in those TBRs. Let me know if you guys read any good thrillers in the month of October, because I'm always down to know about more good thrillers that I can look for when I'm at the used bookstore or at Chapters. And yeah, if you guys want to support me, I have a Patreon and a Coffee page, which I'll put in the description down below, as well as a link to purchase a bookmark if you want one of those. You guys know the drill. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post videos every Monday and Thursday. And until next time, keep on reading.